The night was blacker than any of the men aboard the U-boat had ever seen. The sea itself seemed to have swallowed the moon, leaving nothing but the dim, wavering lights of distant ships and the occasional glimmer of phosphorescence in the waves. Inside the cramped steel hull, the crew moved like ghosts, their movements careful and practiced, each man aware that even the slightest mistake could mean death. The submarine hummed with the mechanical rhythm of life beneath the waves, the pumps, the engines, the faint creaking of the metal as it adjusted to the ocean's pressure. Captain Reinhardt stood at the control panel, peering into the dimly lit periscope, his jaw set tight and his knuckles white. He had been tracking the convoy for hours, waiting for the right moment to strike. Intelligence had promised a cluster of Allied ships, vulnerable and poorly guarded. The crew's nerves were taut, each man silently rehearsing his role, each heart beating in synchrony with the low hum of the diesel engines. Outside, the sea was deceptively calm, but beneath the surface, currents twisted and collided, hiding the deadly unpredictability of war. Then, without warning, a shadow emerged from the darkness, a silhouette too large to ignore, a destroyer cutting through the black waters like a blade. Reinhardt's eyes widened as he realized the mistake. They had been spotted, or worse, they had miscalculated the convoy's movements. He barked orders, each syllable sharp and deliberate. "Dive! Hard astern! All hands! Brace!" Chaos erupted. Inside the U-boat, crewmen stumbled over each other, straps and ropes tangling, metal clanging against metal. The engines roared as the submarine attempted to dive, but the destroyer's sonar had already locked onto them. Reinhardt could hear the distant, ominous ping of depth charges being readied. Heart pounding, he pushed the vessel to its limits, twisting valves, adjusting ballast tanks, desperate to avoid catastrophe. But fate is a cruel master. In a sudden, violent jolt, the steel hull of the U-boat shuddered, a grinding, tearing sound echoing through its narrow corridors. The destroyer had rammed them. The impact threw men off their feet, sent instruments flying, and ruptured the pressure. Hull. Water began to seep in with terrifying speed, icy fingers racing through the submarine's veins. Shouts and alarms filled the confined space, a symphony of panic and disbelief. Reinhardt's mind raced as he tried to comprehend the impossible, how quickly a silent, confident strike had turned into a fight for survival. The crew's training did little against the immediate chaos. They scrambled for life vests, for emergency, escape hatches for any hope that the sinking vessel would not claim them all. Torpedoes lay in their racks, useless now, their lethal purpose rendered meaningless by the sudden disaster. Through the periscope glass, the destroyer's lights blazed, an ominous beacon that cut through the dark water, revealing the U-boat's exposed position. As the water rose, creeping relentlessly, the men realized the vessel was beyond saving. Reinhardt gave the order to abandon ship. Metal groaned and cracked under the pressure of the incoming sea, and one by one men slipped into the icy waters, clinging to whatever debris they could find. The cold was immediate and cruel, biting into their skin, stealing their breath. The destroyer's silhouette loomed above them, indifferent to their plight, a monstrous shape in the dark, leaving them exposed to the merciless waves. Amid the panic, there were moments of surreal clarity. Hands reached for hands, voices called out names, promises of survival mingled with prayers. The crew's camaraderie, forged in the suffocating tightness of the U-boat, now became their lifeline. Reinhardt, struggling to keep his head above water, scanned the churning darkness for survivors. He saw flashes of helmets and hands, faces, etched with fear and disbelief, bobbing like debris in the violent sea. Time became meaningless. Seconds stretched into eternities as the men fought the cold, the waves, and the shock. Each breath was a battle, each stroke a testament to their will to live. The U-boat, once their fortress, now lay half submerged, a steel carcass in the indifferent ocean. The destroyer's distant engine hum and the occasional echo of hails through the night were the only reminders that the war above and below the surface continued, uncaring of the human lives tossed into its depths, and in that darkness, floating. Amidst the wreckage, Captain Reinhardt realized a truth more harrowing than the destroyer's attack. Survival was no longer a matter of skill or strategy. It was a matter of endurance, of willpower, and of sheer, stubborn hope against a sea that wanted nothing more than to claim them all. The cold was instantaneous, stabbing at every exposed inch of skin, stealing strength and clarity with each passing second. The men of the U-boat had trained for missions under the crushing pressure of the deep, for calculated attacks and silent approaches, but none had prepared them for the brutality of the open sea, naked and vulnerable. Captain Reinhardt fought to keep his head above the waves, water thrashing around him, his lungs burning with the effort to draw each breath. He clutched a piece of floating wreckage, its edges jagged but steady enough to hold his weight, and scanned the night for the scattered silhouettes of his crew. Panic and confusion surged like the waves themselves. Some men struggled silently, swallowed by the darkness, while others shouted, names, pleas, curses, all merging into a discordant chorus of desperation. Helmets bobbed up and down, some sinking beneath the surface only to resurface moments later as the current tossed them about. The cold sapped their energy, numbing limbs to the point where they barely responded, their muscles stiffening as if the sea itself were trying to claim them before the night ended. Reinhardt called out, his voice hoarse, echoing off the waves, hoping that even in the distance someone would hear and respond. Hold on, stay together. But the currents were relentless, dragging men apart, twisting the fragile unity of the crew into chaos. One by one, they were forced to fight not only the sea, but the terror gnawing at their minds, the creeping realization that this night could be the last they would ever see. They clung to debris, planks, lifebelts, anything that would prevent them from slipping beneath the black waters. Each man's breath came in ragged gasps, white vapor rising and dissolving into the night air. Some attempted to assist their comrades, pulling them toward small floating wreckage, but the relentless waves and their own fatigue made even simple acts of rescue perilous. The water had its own rhythm, a cruel, indifferent tide that measured survival not in skill but in stubbornness. Memories and regrets surged alongside the waves. Reinhardt thought of his family far away, of letters he had written but never sent, of the simple comforts of dry land, of the smell of oil and steel replaced now by salt and cold. He remembered the crew, young men from small villages, brothers in arms who had laughed and cursed and argued only days ago in the narrow corridors of the U-boat. Now they were shadows in the dark, each struggling against the same relentless enemy. Hours seemed to pass without distinction. The cold was constant, gnawing at the skin, seeping into bones. Frost formed on lips and eyelashes, muscles stiffened into painful knots, and yet no one could allow themselves to surrender. Survival demanded more than hope. It demanded calculation even in the grip of terror. Reinhardt directed the few able-bodied men to cluster together, creating a fragile circle against the rolling waves. They shared water rations, meager as they were, and offered what words of encouragement they could muster, even when their own teeth chattered uncontrollably. As dawn approached, the horizon revealed no salvation, only the gray expanse of endless sea, stretching like a void. Fatigue made men hallucinate, shapes in the water that weren't there, phantom cries carried by the wind, shadows of distant ships that vanished when approached. Every movement was an agony, but every second survived was a small victory. They swam toward any possible cover, drifted with the current when their strength failed, and prayed silently that the next moment would not be their last. The destroyer was nowhere in sight now, having moved on after the initial assault, leaving the crew to fend for themselves. Its absence brought no relief. It was replaced by the realization that the vast sea did not care for courage, loyalty, or skill. It was a cold, indifferent judge, and every man had to fight to prove himself worthy of life. Reinhardt found himself beside Unteroffizier Keller, a wiry man with trembling hands, his face pale and eyes wide with shock. "Stay with me," Reinhardt urged, gripping Keller's arm. "We survive together, or we don't survive at all." They clung to a large plank, sharing warmth where they could, their shivering bodies entwined in a desperate effort to stave off hypothermia. Around them, others did the same, small islands of resistance against the vast, merciless waves. As the hours dragged on, exhaustion began to erode discipline. Arguments flared briefly over debris, over the simplest attempts to pull someone toward a floating plank. Fear made rationality fragile, yet even in the chaos, bonds endured. Hands reached out to steady each other, whispered reassurances passed from one man to another, and glimmers of leadership shone through the darkness. Reinhardt, though weakened, continued to command, to organize, to keep hope alive, even as the sea threatened to extinguish it. Finally, as the sun struggled to breach the horizon, painting the water in cold shades of gray and silver, the first sign of possible salvation appeared. A distant shape, blurred and wavering, moved against the waves. A ship, perhaps an allied vessel, perhaps a merciful hand from fate. The men's energy surged anew. Exhausted, numb, trembling, they paddled, clung, and called out with whatever strength remained. Every stroke, every grasp, every desperate motion was a rebellion against the cold and against despair itself. In that moment, the struggle was not just for life, it was for dignity, for courage, for the proof that even in the abyss of the ocean, human will could refuse to bow. Each man's fight against the cold, against the waves, against the overwhelming odds, was a testament to the bonds that had formed aboard the U-boat and now in the merciless sea. And as the distant ship grew closer, shimmering uncertainly through the morning mist, hope became more than a word. It became a tangible possibility, a lifeline against the darkness that had consumed them all night. The distant shape had grown, clearer with the rising sun, a silhouette against the pale, trembling horizon. Reinhardt's eyes, red-rimmed and burning from exhaustion and cold, refused to believe it at first. He rubbed his face with his numb hands, gripping the floating plank tighter, and forced himself to focus. The men around him sensed it too, a subtle shift in energy, a fragile spark of hope igniting in their frozen veins. Whispers and hoarse shouts of encouragement floated across the water. "There! Look! It's coming this way!" As the vessel drew nearer, the features became apparent. A rescue ship, likely alerted by the previous night's chaos or chance observation, moving with deliberate precision through the choppy waves. Reinhardt signaled to his crew, pointing, shouting names, urging them to cling to debris and gather any remaining strength. The water had taken a toll on them. Skin was pale and bruised, muscles stiff and unresponsive, lips cracked and blue. Yet the prospect of rescue spurred a final, desperate burst of effort. The crew paddled, kicked, and grasped whatever floated. Within reach, their coordination tenuous but fueled by survival instinct. Reinhardt, though weak, moved from one man to another, stabilizing them, offering words that carried authority and reassurance in equal measure. Some men had given up hope entirely, their heads drooping beneath the waves, eyes half closed in fatigue or despair. Reinhardt pulled them back, sometimes dragging, sometimes propping them against floating debris, refusing to allow the sea to claim them before salvation arrived. The rescue ship's crew began to spot the survivors, their shouts cutting through the roar of the waves. Lines were thrown, small lifeboats lowered, and the work of retrieval began with methodical urgency. Reinhardt directed the men, instructing them to grab the ropes, to cling to each other if needed, and to conserve their dwindling strength. One by one, the shivering, exhausted figures were pulled from the sea, coughing, gasping, and shivering uncontrollably. Each rescue was a small triumph, a reminder that perseverance could bend even the indifferent forces of nature. Time became measured by proximity and success. Each man hauled aboard was another victory against the night's torment. Reinhardt himself struggled to grasp the rope, every movement a battle, but the promise of dry deck and warm blankets drove him forward. He felt a hand take his own, steadying him, pulling him upward into the fragile safety of the ship's deck. The warmth hit him immediately, numbing the remnants of pain and replacing it with the overwhelming relief of survival. Around him, men lay draped over each other and over blankets, their breaths shallow but steadily returning, faces pale but alive, eyes haunted yet grateful. On deck, the officers of the rescue ship worked efficiently, offering hot drinks, dry clothing, and immediate medical attention. Reinhardt observed, noting the silent professionalism, the lack of judgment despite the origin of these survivors. They were simply human, brought into the warmth and safety of another vessel after a night of unimaginable terror. The crew murmured thanks, whispers carried in trembling voices, gratitude mingled with lingering fear. Some cried silently, some laughed shakily, all processing the enormity of what they had endured. Reinhardt walked the deck slowly, counting heads, ensuring none had been overlooked, noting the missing, those swallowed by the merciless waves. Survivor's guilt settled like a heavy stone in his chest. He had managed to keep most of his crew alive, but the sea had taken some, exacting a grim toll that no training, courage, or preparation could have fully prevented. The memories of last night's collisions, the screaming alarms, the icy water, and the desperate clinging to life haunted him, etched into his mind with a clarity he feared would never fade. Yet, despite the loss, there was an undeniable bond among the survivors. The shared ordeal had forged an unbreakable connection, a testament to human endurance in the face of unimaginable odds. Reinhardt saw men supporting one another, offering blankets, sharing small sips of water, quietly tending to injuries, all while exchanging words of comfort and solidarity. There was a fragile, tentative hope now, hope that they could return to dry land, report the events, and perhaps, in time, heal. As the rescue ship turned toward safety, leaving the site of the U-boat's demise behind, Reinhardt stood at the railing, staring into the expanse of the now calm sea. The wreckage was scattered, half submerged, a stark reminder of the night's chaos. He thought of those lost, of the crew members who had been claimed by the cold and the currents, and silently vowed that their sacrifice would not be forgotten. The sea had been merciless, but human resilience, courage, and the bonds of loyalty had triumphed, even in the smallest measure. The sun rose higher, casting gold across the water, reflecting in the survivors' eyes as they recovered their strength. There was still a long journey ahead, both literal and emotional, but for the first time in hours, perhaps days, they felt the simple, profound relief of being alive. Reinhardt, standing amidst the weary crew, allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. Survival was never guaranteed, and the sea remained as merciless as ever. Yet humanity had endured, and sometimes that was enough.